Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're looking into some really fascinating machine learning research, specifically on detecting facial palsy.
That's right. We're diving into a paper called A Multimodal Fusion Model, Leveraging MLP Mixer and Handcrafted Features-Based Deep Learning Networks for Facial Palsy Detection.
Quite a mouthful.
It is. But what really caught our eye was how it combines different AI approaches to tackle, well, a pretty persistent challenge in medical diagnosis.
Exactly. It's this idea of looking at the problem from multiple angles, using both, the raw visual information from photos and these very specifically designed features.
Which seems to be the key to getting better results here.
It really speaks to the power of multimodal fusion in machine learning, bringing different kinds of data together.
Okay, so let's set the stage. Why is this paper important? As it points out, the way doctors usually diagnose facial palsy is through clinical exams. And while those are vital, they can be, well...
subjective.
Yeah, subjective, and hard to quantify precisely. Right. Which makes it tough to track how a patient's doing over time, or, say, compare one patient to another for research.
And we know facial palsy itself, the drooping, the muscle weakness, it can really impact someone's life, eating, communication, even psychological well-being.
Yes, definitely. So a more objective, quantifiable method, that would be a big step forward.
And that's where this AI model comes in. It's a multimodal fusion model. Sounds fancy, but what does that actually mean in this context?
It basically means it uses different types of data, different modalities, and combines insights from them. They've got two main parts working together here.
Okay.
First, there's something called an MLP mixer. This works on the unstructured image data, so regular color photos, or they also tried black and white images that just show the lines, the facial contours.
MLP mixer. That's maybe less common than, say, a standard CNN like ResNet?
It is, yeah. It works a bit differently. Instead of convolutions, it divides the image into patches and then sort of mixes information across these patches and across different feature channels. Yeah. The idea is it might be better at capturing long-range dependencies, which could be good for spotting asymmetry across the whole face. They did compare it to ResNet 50 and another one, Faster VT, actually.
Interesting. Okay, so that's one part, handling the images. What's the second part?
The second part uses a more, let's say, traditional feed-forward neural network. But this one processes structured data.
Structured data like?
Things like the exact coordinates of facial landmarks, points on the eyes, nose, mouth. Also features designed to represent facial expressions, like how much a smile is present. And crucially, these things they call handcrafted features.
Right, handcrafted features. That term always makes me pause. In an era of deep learning automatically finding features, why go back to handcrafting them?
That's a really good point. It seems counterintuitive, maybe.
Yeah.
But it's about injecting specific domain knowledge. Deep learning is great, but sometimes we know certain measurements are clinically important.
Oh, okay.
So here they used established methods. They cite a specific methodology to calculate things like how symmetrical are the eyebrows? How aligned are the corners of the mouth? Is one eye closing less than the other during a blink or smile?
So they're basically translating a doctor's visual assessment into numbers.
Exactly. Quantifying things like angles, relative positions, asymmetry ratios. These 29 specific measurements are then fed into that second network.
Got it. So the MLP mixer looks at the whole picture, learns visual patterns, while the other network gets these very precise, human-defined measurements of asymmetry. How do they actually combine these?
They tried a couple of fusion strategies. One is early fusion. Here, you basically take the feature representations learned by the MLP mixer from the image and the features from the feed-forward network from the handcrafted measurements, stick them together, and then feed that combined feature vector into another network to make the final prediction.
So you combine them fairly early in the process.
Right. The other way is late fusion. You train the MLP mixer model and the handcrafted feature model completely separately, get their individual predictions, and then you just average those predictions at the very end.
And which one worked better?
The early fusion approach won out, specifically combining the MLP mixer working on the standard RGB color images with a network using those handcrafted features. That combo achieved a really high F1 score, 96,000.
96,000. That sounds impressive. Remind us, the F1 score balances.
Precision and recall. So it measures how good the model is at correctly identifying patients with palsy, that's recall or sensitivity, and how many of its positive predictions are actually correct, that's precision. A high F1 means it's doing well on both fronts.
And 96 is significantly better than using just one data type, right? What were those scores?
Yeah, much better. The MLP mixer on RGB images alone got an F1 of 89.0 there. Still good, but not 96.
Okay.
And the handcrafted features network on its own was around 82.80. So combining them gave a really substantial boost.
That really drives home the point, doesn't it? That the sum is greater than the parts here. Combining that sort of global visual analysis from the MLP mixer with the very specific targeted asymmetry measurements, that's the secret sauce.
Precisely. The MLP mixers may be good at seeing the overall facial gestalt, subtle texture changes, while the handcrafted features provide these explicit, clinically validated numbers about asymmetry that complement each other perfectly.
It's a smart way to leverage both the power of deep learning on raw data and, well, decades of clinical observation distilled into those features.
Exactly.
Now let's zoom out a bit. This isn't the first time people have tried using computers to help with facial palsy, is it? Where does this paper sit in the sort of history of this research area?
No, definitely not the first attempt. It builds on a lot of prior work. Early on, maybe back in the 90s and 2000s, the approaches were very much based on manual feature extraction and traditional machine learning.
Like what sort of things?
People tried things like quantitative analysis of movement tracking points on the face during expressions. Some used surface electromyography, putting sensors on the face to measure muscle activity. Others used image processing techniques like local binary patterns to look at texture.
Okay.
And there were also efforts using 3D scanning or photogrammetry to get really precise 3D models of the face and measure symmetry that way.
So a lot of different angles even back then, but requiring a lot of explicit definition of what to measure.
Very much so. It was very reliant on engineers and clinicians deciding beforehand exactly which features the computer should calculate.
Then deep learning started to change things.
Right. The paper touches on this shift. Deep learning models could start to learn the relevant features directly from the image or video data without needing quite so much explicit instruction.
Less hand-holding for the algorithm.
Kind of, yeah. So you started seeing work using convolutional neural networks, then more advanced things like 3D CNNs that could analyze video over time, capturing the dynamics of facial movement.
Because palsy often affects movement, not just static appearance.
Exactly. People also experimented with combining different deep learning models, focusing specifically on asymmetry metrics learned by the AI, and using data augmentation, creating more training examples by slightly altering existing ones, which is super important when medical data is scarce.
And the paper mentions a big challenge in the field has been the lack of standard data sets, right?
Huge challenge. A lot of previous studies use private in-house data sets, which is fine for initial research, but it makes it incredibly difficult to compare method A from one paper with method B from another. You don't know if the difference is the method or the data.
So what did this paper do about that?
This is a key contribution, I think. They used publicly available data sets, specifically the YouTube facial palsy data set, which has videos of actual patients, and the extended Cohn-Kanade data set, which has posed expressions from healthy individuals.
Using public data makes their results more verifiable and useful as a benchmark then.
Absolutely. It allows other researchers to test their own methods on the same data and make direct comparisons. It's a really positive step towards more standardized evaluation in this area. They also used a rigorous evaluation method called leave one patient out cross-validation.
Okay, so let's try and summarize the key points here, thinking about the context. We've gone from very manual feature definition to deep learning features automatically. This paper shows a powerful next step, integrating both.
Right. Fusing the learned features from images, using a promising architecture like MLP Mixer, with those carefully selected, structured, handcrafted features gives a significant performance boost for detection.
And doing it on public data sets adds real value for the research community.
Definitely. It provides a strong benchmark.
What about the real-world implications? If this kind of technology matures, what could it mean in the clinic?
Well, the potential is quite significant. You could imagine AI-powered tools assisting clinicians, providing more objective, quantitative data to supplement their own examination.
So not replacing the doctor, but giving them better tools.
Exactly. It could help track a patient's symptom intensity much more precisely over time. Are they getting better with treatment? How quickly?
That seems really valuable for monitoring recovery.
For sure. And it could also make it easier to compare symptoms across different patients, which is important for clinical trials testing new therapies. You need consistent measures.
Could it lead to automated screening or use in telemedicine? Maybe.
Potentially, down the line. You could envision scenarios where maybe an initial assessment could be done remotely using this kind of analysis. But there are hurdles, of course.
Like explainability. Doctors need to trust the AI's output.
That's a huge one.
Yeah.
The paper mentions explainable AI, XAI, as a key area for future work. Clinicians need to understand why the model is making a certain prediction, especially in medicine. Gaining that trust is essential for adoption.
Makes sense. Okay, let's shift gears to our novel notions segment. We take the core ideas of the paper and brainstorm some potential next steps or related research avenues.
Sounds good.
So this paper focused really well on binary detection, palsy or no palsy. But you mentioned the data set they used, the YouTube one, actually had some labels for intensity or severity.
It did, yeah. Clinicians had rated intensity for the eye and mouth regions.
So first novel notion, could we take this powerful multimodal fusion approach and extend it beyond just detection to actually grade the severity of the palsy?
Ooh, I like that. So instead of just a yes-no output, the model predicts, say, a score on the House-Brackman scale. That's a common clinical grading system.
Or maybe even a more granular continuous score.
That would be really interesting. Given how well the fusion model performed on detection, that high F1 score suggests it's picking up on quite subtle features already.
Right. It seems plausible that those combined features contain enough information to distinguish between mild, moderate, and severe cases.
And if you add the temporal dimension, like analyzing video, which the authors suggest, you could look at the dynamics of movement. How fast can they blink? How symmetrical is their smile as it forms? That contains a lot of severity information.
Yeah, building on work like Story et al.'s 3D PalsyNet, but with this richer multimodal imprint.
Exactly. The real-world impact there is clear. More precise grading means better treatment planning, much more objective ways to monitor recovery, and evaluating how well different treatments work.
Okay, that's a strong first notion. What's another direction this could go?
Well, thinking about diagnosis, facial palsy isn't just one thing, right? Bell's palsy is the most common cause, but you also have things like Ramsay-Hunt syndrome, Lyme disease, tumors, different underlying causes.
And presumably the treatment might differ depending on the cause.
Sometimes significantly. So here's the second notion. Could we train a model like this, maybe with some additional data, to not just detect palsy, but to help differentiate between the types or etiologies of facial palsy?
Wow, okay. That sounds ambitious. What kind of extra data would you need?
That's the big question. Maybe you need to incorporate other clinical information, patient history, other symptoms. Or perhaps there are extremely subtle patterns within the facial data itself. The asymmetry patterns captured by the handcrafted features or the textures seen by the MLP mixer that correlate with specific causes.
So the AI might learn, for instance, that this specific pattern of weakness plus maybe some subtle texture difference is more indicative of cause A than cause B.
That's the hope. It's pushing towards AI for differential diagnosis. It would likely require much larger, carefully labeled data sets that include the confirmed underlying cause, not just the presence of palsy.
But the potential payoff would be huge. Earlier, more accurate identification of the specific type of palsy could lead to faster, more targeted treatment.
Exactly. Potentially improving outcomes and reducing the risk of long-term complications. It's a challenging goal, but this paper's success with multimodal fusion provides a really solid foundation to start exploring it.
This is really exciting stuff. It underlines how machine learning isn't just about raw algorithmic power, but about thoughtfully combining data, integrating domain knowledge, and tackling problems that really matter.
Absolutely. It's that blend of advanced techniques and smart application design.
Well, that about wraps up our deep dive for today. The big takeaway for me is just how effective combining different data types, the visual information from images, and those specific handcrafted measurements can be, especially using these sophisticated fusion models, a significant step forward for potentially assisting in facial palsy assessment.
Definitely. It shows the path towards more objective, quantifiable tools in the clinic, and it certainly makes you think.
Go on.
Well, it leaves us with that final provocative thought, doesn't it? If combining images and these structured features works so well here, what other medical challenges could benefit from fusing seemingly disparate data types using these advanced AI architectures? Where else can we combine, say, imaging with genetic data or clinical notes with sensor readings in new ways?
A fantastic question to ponder. The possibilities seem vast. For anyone listening who wants to get into the nitty-gritty of this specific study, we've put a link to the full paper in the description.
Thanks for joining us on the Deep Dive.
We'll catch you next time.